Now, Georgia, and specifically Atlanta, is a cultural center for America, and Harris is tapping all these stars you see on your screen as a show of force. She's trying to mix uplift and energy. Here's another look at that rally right now, and when Springsteen comes out, we're probably going to hear from him. But she's trying to mix that energy with turnout, with interviews, with these stars, with positive messaging, while also hammering Donald Trump over how his chief of staff turned whistleblower John Kelly has condemned what he did in office.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted. I think of it as he's just putting out a 911 call to the American people. Understand what could happen if Donald Trump were back in the White House. For many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries. They also care about our democracy and not having a president of the United States who admires dictators and is a fascist.
That's new from Kamala Harris. You could see from an hour-long town hall she did last night with Anderson Cooper. And just there you could see her mixing the messaging, hitting this fascist dictator message while also talking about other kitchen table issues for people. She is hammering Trump's authoritarian ambitions here in these final days of the race. And next week, which is the last full week of campaigning, she's going to take that argument to the exact crime scene that led to what you see here, people storming the Capitol. She's going to give a special address at the same Washington, D.C. location where Trump incited and unleashed those people, some of them now convicted criminals, that you see going up the Capitol steps, trespassing, and then more. Now, Harris is using that appearance next week to draw attention to some legal facts. Much of this we've reported over the years, and many of these plots, which initially we were just telling you about as why it was more than a one-day riot, as it was originally called, well, now you can see how many of them have been indicted and led to his effort to steal the last election. Then you have Trump's aides and lawyers disbarred, indicted, some convicted, all for those coup election crimes. And you broaden out further, and you have, of course, the many cases and convictions that show that Donald Trump has overseen multiple organizations with now convicts, criminals at the head. Some of them are in prison. If you look at the 20 campaign, that upper row, Steve Bannon at this time in 16 was Donald Trump's campaign chair. In 20, he had served in the White House. Now he's convicted. Manafort, you see in 16 on the other side, convicted. The business, Cohen and Weisselberg, spent time in prison, and Trump up top, convicted for the New York crimes. Whether he ever would be sentenced to prison is an open question. But this is the broader point, which might be familiar to people who follow news or legal cases closely, but isn't necessarily on the minds of some holdout, potentially undecided voter. Harris, I'm telling you, next week is going to use this speech to hit all of this. And she's not operating in a vacuum. These dictator warnings might sound like something negative you say about an opponent. And it's very important to the Harris campaign to show the evidence and the testimony, not just make it sound like rhetoric. But then there's what Donald Trump is actually doing that squares the circle. Donald Trump is openly, publicly confirming the very concerns that he would abuse power like a dictator by publicly saying he would fire Special Counsel Jack Smith if he is elected. So that is a certain view of how the government should run and being above the law and saying it in advance. Everyone knows that's what he plans to do. Meanwhile, another Trump vet is coming forward to confirm the same damning account by General Kelly of Trump's repeated positive Hitler references. Retired Army colonel who worked for Kelly.
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. If you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
He frequently said to senior staff, why don't my generals support me the way that Hitler's generals supported him? The fact that President Trump would think of himself in the same sentence as Hitler is a terrifying thing. The man quotes Hitler.
There you have it. So the evidence here is voluminous. You have the sources inside the Trump White House and even the top of the Oval Office hitting the same points. We saw it reported in that bombshell Atlantic story. You have sources on the record, General Kelly and his aide, who you just heard from. There's also General Milley, who spoke to Bob Woodward. There's another Trump-appointed security official now going on record about his authoritarian tendencies and opposing the rule of law. Now a Republican congressman who had served as a Republican congressman in Michigan, doing something unusual that we've now seen becomes more usual in a Harris-Trump face-off, which is yet another Republican endorsing Harris. All of this comes out of the damning accounts of Trump, provided by people picked by Trump, many of whom initially agreed with his conservative policies. That's kind of how they came together. Kelly was a right-wing military person, right-wing on immigration and domestic security, ran DHS for Trump, and then assumed the top position in the White House, other than the president, the chief of staff. Then you're number one, coordinating everything. But this is what he's warning people now as they take their turn and make their decision on this next election. Some of these people are blowing the whistle as sources, others using their own name. Some, we should note, again, consistent with the dictator warning, are doing so at considerable risk, given that they have seen threats of violence, intimidation, and then Donald Trump himself threatening to do the very fascist thing that they warned about. Milley, of course, who served his country with great distinction, talks about how Trump could very well make good on his threats to try to court-martial him if elected, something that Woodward reports on in that book. So what is the MAGA response? Now we are a couple days into the next chapter of this story. Kelly is someone who had not been seen at this level making this kind of warning on the record. And I'll tell you it's twofold. First, there's a kind of blanket denial, which doesn't explain how so many different people would come to the same storyline and take these risks I just mentioned to put this all on record. The campaign denies this. Donald Trump has posted online attacking John Kelly. That's sort of the usual denials. Second, there's this kind of bizarre effort to minimize the reports of embracing Hitler and the Nazi regime, which is the worst genocidal enemy that the U.S. has ever faced. You have Fox hosts and MAGA defenders trying to argue really impossible and unbelievable points. And if the stakes were not so high, this would be laughable. In another bad sign for Trump politically this week, the late night shows, which give many millions of people their own snapshot of this race that they might not be following closely, the late night comics are mocking the reality that this is where the Trump campaign has landed.
This is the first election where reporters have to ask, who'd you root for when you watched Saving Private Ryan? Yeah.
That word fascism gets thrown around a lot, and it's one of those words you hear frequently, but you don't actually know what it means, like emoluments or demure. So
Trump made it worse today when he said, oops, mine bad. And you go, oh, don't say that.
Let me give you a definition. Fascism is a nationalist political movement that builds a cult around an all-powerful leader who vows to protect his loyal subjects from racially inferior others and the enemy within. Now that you know that, upon hearing John Kelly calling Trump a fascist, you're probably thinking, yeah, duh.
So it's all funny, unless it's not. Hearing Trump's top aides warn about the level of his danger is striking. It's a reminder that whoever claims they didn't know about what he was really about back then in the day when he came down the escalator, well, you know now. You know it from the jokes or the facts or just what comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, because so much of this is consistent with what he's vowed to do. Some of the evidence for a fascist approach comes from the things he's literally campaigning on in the home stretch. And remember, much of this is not actually popular when presented to the public. Donald Trump has never won more votes in a federal election. 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton the first time, when for many different reasons, the way he was underestimated benefited him, and there might not have been as high turnout in certain places. And there were certainly votes in Wisconsin and elsewhere that went to protest candidates like the Green Party that were not considered likely Trump votes had they known it was going to be so close. That was the first time. Second time, 7 million more people voted for Biden, and Trump responded with the failed coup, the effort to steal the election, the thing that I mentioned Harris is going to highlight next week as a closing reminder argument to everyone. So the only reason that Donald Trump was in office once at all and picked all these Supreme Court justices who now help him out is the accident of old legal rules that were never updated in our system, where someone can assume the White House even when they come in second. Maybe someday there'll be some way to deal with that, but that's the reason. The result matters a lot. But the result of those rules does not mean there is or has been a majority supporting Donald Trump's past, what he has said and done. Whether that changes, whether he improves his numbers in the next 12 days, well, it's very simple. It's not a suspense thriller. It's not a curveball. It's not a mystery. Whether he continues to be the person who comes in second, as he did in the last two elections, or whether he builds on that support and gets to a different result, is up to the voters.